I thought that I looked appropriately sinister.
Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Stardust City Rag, where things finally start happening. We get a surprise guest appearance of another Voyager character, and our ragtag crew go on a mini heist to rescue Bruce Maddox. Remember, there will be many spoilers ahead for this and other Trek series, otherwise, enjoy. Yep, you guessed it, it's flashback time again as we delve briefly into what Icheb has been up to since he left the USS Voyager, and it seems he's gotten himself into a bit of a bind as his eye is violently yanked out of his socket without any anaesthetic. He's being harvested for Borg parts it seems, but just before they can dig into his skull for more, his would-be torturers are quickly dispatched by an angry 7 of 9. She tries to help him, but it seems he's been mortally wounded and asks her for a mercy killing, to which she agonisingly carries out. Cut to the present day, we're at Picard where a scantily clad crime lady called Bjayzl is being informed that Bruce Maddox has come to her needing some help. Despite initially wanting him dead, she promptly changes her mind and goes to see him to see what's going on, learning that the Tal Shiar are after him, having completely destroyed his lab. So she instead knocks him out, presumably with the intention of selling him back to the Tal Shiar. On the La Serena, Seven and Picard have a chat about what she's been up to lately, being a vigilante helping the helpless whilst downing bourbon like a champ, clearly having improved her ability to hold her liquor since Voyager.
You're intoxicated.
Impossible.
Your blood synthahol level is 0.05%. How many glasses of champagne did you consume?
1.
Obviously the Borg can't hold their liquor.
Picard explains his mission to her, that he's been trying to help someone in need, so Seven says she'd like to tag along and join him in his mission to Free Cloud. As Rios and Raffi exposit about Seven and Picard's ex-Borg histories, Jurati is nostalgically watching an old film reel of her and Maddox where we learn the two were clearly lovers at some point. Eventually they arrive at Free Cloud, and after getting rid of some annoying holo ads, Raffi finds her way into the system and finds that Bjayzl is looking for a middleman to broker a deal between her and the Tal Shiar in exchange for Maddox. Picard insists they need to extract him before that can happen, but Raffi says they can't outbid the Tal Shiar, and that Bjayzl has some pretty tough security, including a Beta Anari, a nasty piece of reptilian work that can sniff out lies in an instant if you're not careful, so extracting him is unlikely. But Seven says it is possible if they can offer something more valuable to Bjayzl in exchange, saying that one thing she values most are Borg components, and so Seven offers herself as the bait in exchange for Maddox, given her body is loaded with Borg technology. So it's time for a little heist caper as Rios and Picard dress themselves up flamboyantly to be faces, or middlemen, looking to sell Seven in exchange for Maddox. Raffi does her best to prep them for what's to come, including giving Rios a dose of drugs that will help him evade the lie-sniffing reptilian if he's pushed. Picard meanwhile decides to put on his best French accent, whilst Elnor just looks confused as to what's going on, seemingly having no ability to understand that this is all just a pretense. Raffi also gives Seven a pattern enhancer to ensure that they can have a stable tunnel to beam in and out of as they need to, especially if shit hits the fan. Finally, Jurati gets to be on transporter duty to do the necessary beaming, making her rather nervous. Raffi though isn't joining this heist, instead having finally arrived at Free Cloud for her own purposes, says her goodbyes to Picard and beams down. It's here that we learn her son Gabriel is living here with his heavily pregnant Vulcanoid partner. Raffi is trying to make amends for abandoning him in favour of rescuing Romulans and then going off the rails into depression and drug dependence, but Gabriel is having none of it, clearly very angry at how she treated him and his father, instead more interested in going looking for conspiracies regarding the attack on Mars rather than being a good mother. He then promptly tells her to please fuck off, leaving Raffi rather devastated. So the crew begin their little deception. Rios manages to bluff his way past the lie-sniffing bodyguard thanks to the drugs, Picard shows off Seven as proof of their merchandise, flamboyantly showing off his evil Frenchman role, and demands to see proof that Maddox is alive and well before he hands Seven over. Bjayzl shows up with Maddox, and after seeing Seven it's clear that these two know each other all too well, and suddenly guns are being pointed at them, with Picard realising that there may be more here than Seven told him. As Rios tells a super anxious Jurati to stand by to extract them, Seven quickly grabs Bjayzl by the jugular and forces her henchmen to drop their weapons, where the two then proceed to have a quick back and forth about their history. It seems Bjayzl infiltrated the Fenris Rangers and got close to Seven, giving her interest in selling Borg parts, and learnt about Icheb, who was also trying to help out the Rangers. A trap was laid, and it was Bjayzl who betrayed Seven, captured Icheb and had his components torturously extracted. This all served to make Seven rather pissed off with her, and is now looking for some good old-fashioned revenge. Picard tries to convince her that this isn't the way as the lie-sniffing reptilian tries to whip out a secret phaser, but Rios is thankfully there to back them up and promptly dispatches him before telling Seven that though he understands her desire for revenge, it'll put a bounty on all their heads which Picard wouldn't stand a chance against, and implores her to stay her revenge for now until they're all safely off, reassuring her that if she found Bjayzl once, she can do it again. So they use the pattern enhancer to beam back to the La Serena along with Maddox. With everyone back on board, Jurati takes Maddox to sickbay whilst Rios casually leaves the pattern enhancer on the dashboard, allowing Seven to quickly pick it up. She also picks up a couple of phaser rifles before she and Picard share a final moment together, discussing their shared experience of Borg assimilation and trying to regain their humanity before promptly beaming back down, vaporizing Bjayzl and going out in what appears to be a blaze of glory. In sickbay, Picard speaks to a badly injured Maddox, who explains that he created Dahj and Soji, sending them both to Earth and the Cube to find out the real reason why synthetics were banned in the Federation, saying that he thinks that not only are the Romulans behind it somehow, but also the Federation is involved too, suggesting a deeply layered conspiracy. He tells Picard where he can find Soji before Jurati tells him it's best Maddox gets some rest for now before asking any more questions, so Picard goes to Rios and tells him to set a course for the Cube before checking in on a stowaway they have on board, which turns out to be Raffi. Back in sickbay, Jurati has a chat with Maddox, happy to see him, but clearly a painful reunion for her, and even more so as she tells him that she wishes she didn't know what she now knows, and ends up murdering him to prevent Picard from getting any more answers. Well, finally the plot started moving and stuff started happening. We finally caught up with Maddox, however briefly. There was a surprise appearance from Icheb, even more briefly, and there's some good stuff with 7 of 9. Overall, I think this was probably the most entertaining episode so far, mostly down to 7's inclusion and a far more focused episode instead of switching back and forth between Picard and the Cube, though still not at all attaining anything near greatness or being amazing as things stand, and I do have issues with it being so graphic with this opening torture scene. If this wasn't called Star Trek, change the character names and races a little, this could easily be another generic sci-fi show. It's not bad or awful by any stretch, just okay. In fact, the show is probably more entertaining if you removed it entirely from the world of Star Trek, because then I could accept that world more easily, but I still judge it by the metric of what I come to expect in a Star Trek show. This is certainly one of the darkest Trek episodes to date, and arguments will be forever had on whether this is necessary or not. I personally am not a great fan of this current era, because to me Star Trek has always represented a universe of hope, optimism, idealism, and a place where we had bettered ourselves as a species, leaving behind many of the problems we face today. It's a universe I want to live in more than any other I've known because of that. But now it seems to be a universe of despair, tragedy, darkness, and grittiness, just like most other sci-fi shows. Don't get me wrong, I love a good dark gritty sci-fi show as much as the next nerd. I mean, just look at The Expanse, by far my favourite modern sci-fi show of all time, but it's fine for that particular universe's setting. It's just not what I want out of Star Trek, and why the Orville continues to be far more Star Trek to me in its feel and tone than modern Star Trek has tended to be. Now, you can argue that DS9 was pretty dark for a Trek show, and it undoubtedly was in some episodes, but it never lost its overall feel of that Trekian ideal the Starfleet characters carry with them, and how that affected other characters with more dubious motivations over time. Remember this fantastic scene?
What do you think? It's vile. I know. It's so bubbly and cloying and happy. Just like the Federation. But you know what's really frightening? If you drink enough of it, you begin to like it. It's insidious. Just like the Federation.
This is obviously going to vary from person to person, and it depends whether you strictly adhere unwaveringly to Gene Roddenberry's vision, or whether you think it's okay to push that ideal around to see where it can go, which I think DS9 did superbly without ever breaking it. I'll address this in more detail in the future, perhaps in a season review, but please don't mistake this opinion for me hating on Picard, because I certainly don't hate it, and if I remove myself from the things that I want out of Star Trek, it's still a generally enjoyable show. Anyway, let's get stuck into this episode, shall we? First off, it looks like I was wrong to doubt the theory that Jurati was a spy or a mole. In retrospect, it's pretty obvious, I guess. The cutaway from her conversation with Commodore O, her timing saving Picard in the chateau, the sloppy nature of that attack. I still think Jurati is a decent, honest person who has maybe simply been tricked or coerced into doing what she's done. She clearly feels a lot of pain and anguish over her actions, so I think it's going to be easy for her to be reconverted back to Picard's side in the end. The question is, what is it that they told her that forced her into this? She mentions something about wishing she didn't know what she knew, and my theory is maybe Commodore O told her about this destroyer myth and that Soji will be the end of all life. If Jurati was convinced of this, then I can believe she might do whatever it takes to try and prevent Picard from saving Soji or reaching his destination. But certainly I don't think she's doing it out of malicious intention or hatred of androids. I think you can also kiss your Rios as a hologram theory goodbye too, since he left the ship this episode and had to take some drugs from Raffi to evade the lie-detecting bodyguard when trying to convince him that he's a middleman for some merchandise. But once again, this episode continues the somewhat annoying trend of a far in the past flashback, though only 13 years this time instead of 14, and a rather brief one too, as we see a surprise appearance by Icheb, played by a different actor this time, last seen along with Seven over on Voyager. Icheb was of course a former Borg rescued from the collective by the Voyager crew in Season 6, and Seven became a sort of surrogate mother to him as she helped him to recover. He also wanted to join Starfleet, and whilst on Voyager started his training towards that end, so I'm glad he finally got his wish seeing as he's wearing a Starfleet uniform. However, his appearance is short-lived, and in a gruesome, uncomfortable, and frankly unnecessary scene, is having his Borg implants extracted from him without any anaesthetic. Honestly, I'm not sure why they didn't bother sedating him or giving him an anaesthetic unless you simply enjoy being cruel and torturing people. It feels a little forced to me in order to give further motivation for Seven to exact revenge later on. I just feel this same motivation could have been accomplished without that cruelty factored into it. Anyway, she ends up mercy killing him. I'm not entirely certain why he couldn't have been taken to a medical facility. We know 24th century medicine is extremely advanced at this point, but apparently Icheb wanted to die there and then, and so he does. Again, feels a little forced in order to motivate Seven because not only does she see him being tortured, she's forced to kill him. I honestly don't think Seven would have needed this in order for her to pursue her agenda to kill Bjayzl, considering how she felt like a mother to Icheb as it was. All she had to do was come to his rescue to find she was already too late, with the implications of what he suffered made clear without it being graphically shown to us. But I guess it's all for the shock value and drama these days. We learn that the neutral zone essentially collapsed into a lawless area of space where pirates and warlords run rampant, but a group called the Fenris Rangers do their best to try and help and maintain order where they can, of which Seven is a member, doing her best to help people in need wherever she can. This group was name dropped in the last episode, but I was unsure if this was just another Romulan faction at the time or someone else, so I didn't comment on it back then. I did think Jeri Ryan was doing an awesome job here though, and it's wonderful to see her reprise the role. Seven herself is a lot more human than when we last saw her, but I see it as a natural evolution for her character given it's been some 20 plus years since the events of Voyager. She was by far one of the best characters on the show and had the best character growth and development in a show largely devoid of any such things, as she slowly rediscovered her humanity and gradually became better integrated with the crew. If I'm disappointed with anything, it's that she, like many of our characters in this show, have become jaded, bitter and cynical. I would have hoped that Seven would retain some hopefulness given all she learned with the Voyager crew, but instead her life has turned into a more tragic one as she goes around trying to help who she can as a sort of vigilante, murdering several people in this episode. Yep, that's Star Trek these days. Despite her more natural human persona, I can still clearly see aspects of the old Seven lurking here and there. This is often done through her physical performance. I mean, you can see it when she examines Picard's chateau simulation, just little tilts of the head, the way she's examining the room, and in particular her final moments with Picard as she asks about their lost humanity as a result of their mutual assimilation by the Borg, ended with a nice little musical touch of the Voyager theme playing as she beams back down. Although it's rarely touched on, Picard's assimilation, though lasting a mere few days, has haunted him ever since it happened, as he was forced to lead an attack on Starfleet, destroying 39 ships, killing over 11,000 people. We see it almost every time it's brought up, from the Drumhead, rescuing Q in I, Borg, his talk with Sisko in The Emissary, and in the film First Contact where it was a big theme. One thing I noted here was in the last episode I wondered why Picard would have this simulation of the chateau when he told Laris that it didn't feel like home to him. But here he says it wasn't his idea, and I know the previous episode mentioned it was Shaban who has sent over all the details necessary to replicate it, so I'm glad that this was acknowledged. However, it seems Seven isn't sticking around with the crew, and the last we see of her, she gets her revenge on Bjayzl and gets into a phaser fight trying to escape, leaving an open question as to her fate here. I doubt she's dead, since I generally go by the rule that if you don't see your death on screen, then you're probably not dead. I did however like that Rios talks her down from her initial revenge, but clearly understands her need for it, and I think then knowingly leaves the pattern enhancer where she could grab it, beam back down, and complete her revenge without risking the life of Picard and the others. Like I said, I really enjoyed her performance here, and I really hope this isn't the last time we see Seven. Raffi gets to meet her son, which doesn't go well at all. This was apparently why she wanted to come to Freecloud in the first place, and the scene is actually fairly well done and well acted. We don't get reams of exposition regarding their past relationship. She's clearly wanting to try and reconnect after going off the rails for years, and her son wants nothing to do with her, showing nothing but contempt, anger, and clearly feeling abandoned, which seems to be a rather common theme in this show now. Picard abandoned everyone, Raffi abandoned her son, the Federation abandoned the Romulans, and others. However, I still don't really care much about this or her situation, and just feels like a way to make sure we can keep her with the crew. Unless there's some thread that brings her back to her son in the future, then this whole scene just feels a bit pointless in the end. It still brings up big questions for me on where the hell is the Federation's mental health support here. I still have a hard time buying that Raffi went so hard off the rails for 14 years, on Earth no less, without anyone trying to help her in an era where Earth is supposed to be a literal paradise. In any case, I never bought for a second that she'd be leaving the crew at this stop, and sure enough, by the end of the episode she's back on the La Serena. There's not much to say about Maddox himself really. Like, each ep he's played by a different actor here, and he's never really characterised, just left alive long enough to give Picard some crumbs for the next trail of his adventure before being killed by Jurati. We did learn that Jurati and Maddox were lovers, which to me didn't really add anything here except to torture Jurati more as she kills him, and it seems this show really likes torturing its characters as well as giving them abandonment issues. We also learn that he sent Daj and Soji out to find out the truth about why androids were banned, and that not only are the Tau Shiar involved, but elements within the Federation too. This brings up two likely scenarios here. Either Commodore O is a Vulcan, and given several members of the Federation threaten to secede, other elements within the higher echelons could be working with them. Or it's Section 31. Section 31 at least is exactly the sort of organisation that would do this. After all, they were prepared to commit genocide and wipe out the founders. But given Patrick Stewart has publicly stated that Picard will be a show that essentially comments on our current socio-political situations of things like Brexit and Trump, I can also believe that it's an inward-looking Federation or Starfleet that may have done this. We shall see, I guess. Elnor, meanwhile, does fuck all in this episode except act a little dumb and be a metaphorical punching bag for the others given he's so out of place, so I honestly have nothing to say about him for this episode. I also don't have a lot to say about Stardust City itself, other than its Vegas-style approach. I could have done without the silly holograms on the ship as they arrived in orbit. On the surface, it kinda comes across as a generic-looking sci-fi establishment that you might see on any other sci-fi show. I was worried that this would be a long, extended caper episode, given the costumes everyone was wearing to try and fit in, but thankfully that didn't last long. I did, however, enjoy Picard throwing himself into the role with his French accent. It's kinda silly, but I thought it was quite fun, at least for me. The crime lord Bjayzl was serviceable in her role, but otherwise mostly generic evil woman of the week in her portrayal, and I felt a little disconnected from her even though she is the primary focus of Seven's rage. Ultimately, she's there as an obstacle to overcome, so they can rescue Maddox from her clutches and to give Seven a reason to come along with the crew. There were some little Easter eggs here and there with a Mr. Mott hair advert, a comment about Icheb's cortical node which he donated to Seven back in Voyager, and even a mention of Quark. So there we go. A more entertaining episode generally than what's come before, though still with many flaws and issues. It's nice things are finally starting to move along, and the next episode looks like everyone will finally start converging on the queue where things will come to a head. So please do join me next time for the next episode, The Impossible Box. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did then please do check out my other reviews as well, and also if you haven't yet please like, subscribe and share. Until next time, this is Jay Warden, signing off.